You're listening to Luso Canada Podcast, writing history together.
Bem-vindos ao Luso Canadá Podcast, um programa que celebra a comunidade portuguesa do Canadá. Hoje vamos abordar uma personalidade de grande relevo na comunidade portuguesa do Canadá, especialmente no sudoeste do Ontário. De seu nome, António do Forno. António do Forno foi muito importante na edificação do Clube Português de Chatham e na fundação de outras organizações dentro da comunidade. Foi um homem que deixou marcas profundas, não só na comunidade, mas também nas pessoas com quem conviveu, e especialmente com a sua família. E para falar sobre isso, temos aqui connosco hoje dois dos seus filhos, o Paul do Forno, que se junta a nós de Columbus, Ohio, e o Dominic do Forno, que está connosco de Chatham, Ontário. Bem-vindos, muito obrigado por terem aceito o convite.
Obrigado.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paulo. É grande prazer estar aqui convosco.
Now we'll switch to English to make it easier for everyone. And I'd like to start by going back in time to a time where you weren't even born yet, and just to find out about your dad's life in Portugal and what led him to come to Canada.
Well, so back in Portugal, so when my father first started thinking about coming to Portugal, he already had 7 children. There was my oldest sister, and then next to her were 3 boys. And at that time in Portugal, this would be back in the early 60s. Portugal, of course, was under the dictatorship of Salazar. And my father, being a young person, had very progressive ideas, was involved in discussing those ideas with other groups of young people. And there was a bit of a fear there, being under dictatorship. A couple more reasons that sort of pushed my father to come into leave the country was that too he had 3 boys that because Portugal was at war with its colonies in Africa, the likelihood of the 3 of us being drafted was very real. So that put fear into him and wanted something better for us. The other was that 4 of us were going to start going into higher education. And in Portugal, of course, at that time, you went to grade 4. And after grade 4, you'd go to what they called colégio. And that means you had to pay for it. And it would have been way too expensive to put 4 kids through having to pay for that. So, and Dad was very, very strong in educating his children. So he started looking, I've got to go somewhere where the opportunities are better. And there was some talk with friends that Canada was a good place. And there was a bit of family here in Canada. So that's, Dad made the jump and came to Canada in 1966. And initially to Toronto, and then he moved very quickly to Chatham.
Just to step back, maybe to go back a little bit. My dad was born in Adolphe near Vila Real and grew up in a town called Vilarinho de Samardã, like basically in a little small town. Like he was, a small family, that, in many ways the way they grew up was the way so many had grown up and lived for hundreds of years in the north with, some land that they grew food on, and it just wasn't, it was so far being developed versus what they seemed like. I remember my dad saying he remembered the first time seeing a motorbike, right? And, he was born in 1935, and as a kid growing up, they didn't have, there's still donkeys to get around, horses. And so when he was, growing up, his brother was a priest. His brother was a little bit older, and he became a priest when he was still young, and so when he was in school, he also, like many, after a certain year, he went into the seminary because that's the way you could only get education. And so that's the way his life started in a very like, and that was a traditional way in many families, like large families, somebody always became a priest, right? And that was just the way of the North. And so he grew up again in the north of Portugal, so far behind.
So I'm assuming that he came first by himself, and then the family came after.
I was the Canadian mistake, I like to say.
Oh, you would have been.
I came a few years later, uh, but all my brothers and sisters, including Dominic, were came across then.
But Dad came in '66. He came here, prepared the way, saw what Canada was like, and he said, "Yeah, this is where I want my family to grow up." And then in 1967, my mom and the seven of us came and met Dad, and yeah, so we came a year later. He prepped everything for us here. He got an apartment, got a car, all of that, so that when we came, it was easy.
So there's 8 of you.
Yeah, there was seven. Then Paul came along.
Did your dad tell you the kind of community that he found in Chatham when he arrived in 1966?
One of the things that my father did while he was here, he would ship back to us Canadian Tire catalogs. That was one of the ways that we saw that, boy, there's all kinds of things in Chatham. But yeah, he came here, and when we came in '67, so that was centennial year, of course, for Canada. We started school, and it was Portugal wasn't as popular as it is today. Back then we still got bullied a little bit. We were foreigners, we're immigrants. But and Chatham, of course, was a much smaller place. I think they were around the 20,000, 25,000 people. And it was very rural, farming community, and that's where we started too, in the farm. But it was friendly enough. Like I remember going to school, and to this day, I don't remember not being able to communicate or not being able to speak English. I thought, though, I spoke no English prior to coming here, but so we picked up the language fairly quickly, and we just, progressed.
Were there any Portuguese in Chatham when he arrived?
That's a good question. There was a couple families, and those families became very close. And our entertainment would be on Sundays. We would go to different families, not the different families, but there's a couple other families that had a lot of kids like us. So we would visit them one Sunday, and then they'd visit us the next Sunday. So there was a lot of that, and it became a very tight knit community, with a few families that were here. And of course, being Portuguese, and our 99% of us are Catholic, and religion being one of a strong tie. We'd meet up at church, and once in a while we might have had a Portuguese priest that would come in, or somebody would say mass in Portuguese. So that brought the small group together quite a bit.
So how did your dad get involved in the community as a leader? Was he pushed into it, or was it something that he was born with?
It was organic, and of course, my father, like, as Paul evaded to back in Portugal, and people being, coming from small communities, education wasn't prevalent. But my father was lucky enough that he had the 3 years of seminary. So he was well educated. He could, he spoke well. He his written was very good. So as he came to to Chatham, it just organically grew. He didn't get pushed into it. It grew organically. He loved helping people. If anybody asked, he'd help. It didn't matter who you are or where you came from, rich, poor, whatever. He would help. So then people just defaulted to that. They needed something, they would come to him. So it was organic. He didn't get pushed into leadership. People asked, and he just accepted, and he just rose to the task per se.
Paul, you being the younger child, did you understand early on those qualities about your dad that Dominic talks about?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was always in everything. He started the club in 1971, the year I was born. I think one of the things that, again, organically as family came across, I think one of the things that I'd like to point out that, you know, imagine coming from a different country. You don't know the language. You have 7 kids. And, we became like families who would help other families. But you have all these kids, but people would come and want to come work here or live and move to Canada. He would actually host them in the house. We had an extra room. Like, can you imagine like talking to your wife? Hey, yeah, I know we got 7 kids here. Do you mind if a guy who just moved from Portugal, can he stay here for like 3 weeks? And that's the sense of community when Dominic talk about being organic is it wasn't like, hey, there's some big show, I've got some title, I'm going to be on TV. And no, it was like, hey, but this was the way. I think the important thing to understand, it's a Portuguese thing. Like when you're in the village and there's only a few people, you always helped each other. Right? That's what you learned in the north. That's a transmontano thing, Portuguese thing, that you always helped. Hey, that somebody's there. So when somebody came to Canada, of course we're going to help them. And then my poor brothers and sisters had to become the interpreters to help them. Hey, I got to go get my license. Hey, I have to go here. And all of a sudden, Dom and my oldest sister, Tracy, would have to go with them. They're probably just 14, 15 years old and going with these guys. And so he became known as, that's how organically became leader, by doing the little things to help others.
Dominic, you mentioned that he started working in the farms, but I know he progressed into other things as he adapted to Canada, integrated. Can you talk a little bit about what he did for a living?
Well, so when he came, my father worked in construction, worked in several factories, and because there was 7 of us, and at that time, a lot of there was a lot of farm help needed because tomatoes were picked by hand, cucumbers were picked by hand. That opportunity was here, so we as a family would work on the farm. Dad would work. I remember one time he worked in 2 factories at once. He worked in the tobacco factory and in the sugar factory. There used to be a sugar beet factory here, and he worked in both at the same time. I remember him telling me that when he put his boots on to go to the second factory, they were still warm. So he did that, and then he got a job at Motor Wheel. Again, Chatham at that time had quite a bit of factories, so there was farm work, there was factory work, and he took opportunity of everything. So he'd move on to Motor Wheel, and then he would work his shift, and then he'd meet us at the farm. And with that, we established ourselves here. My parents bought a home. We were, we just progressed through that. But that was our start. And again, at that time in the 60s, 70s, there was a lot of opportunities here. And we took advantage of that. And my father took advantage of that, always there taking care of his family. So, yeah, that's, basically what was done here.
So he was a community leader, and that naturally transposed into his professional life, where he led successfully a few businesses.
Well, one of the things that my father also, um, again, he was always looking for progression. He was always looking for something better. So he always wanted to have his own business. So he opened the Portuguese supermarket here in Chatham. And while he had that open, he would go to Toronto every week on, I believe it was Tuesdays. Every Tuesday he would go to Toronto so that on Wednesday there'd be fresh fish and there would be fresh things from Toronto that other stores didn't carry. Now they do, but at the time, none of the big name stores would carry any of the Portuguese stuff. So my dad did that. And because a lot of people would ask him, well, can you get me a, a flight to Portugal? And because of his connection, he started doing that a little bit. And then he formed a bit of a relationship with a couple agencies in Toronto. And from there progressed to then he opened his own agency in Chatham. And then he opened in Leamington. And then one time he had an agency also in Windsor. So he was always looking to do more, always to progress, and then ended up just running the agency in Leamington, and there, formed a lot of friendships, and also was very involved with the Portuguese club in Leamington.
So in 1966, when your father arrived in Chatham, there wasn't much of a community, or of a Portuguese community. But 5 years later, by 1971, there weren't enough Portuguese in the area to form a Portuguese club. And obviously, your dad is a co-founder of the club and one of the major players in the formation of the association. I know you probably don't remember much because you were young at the time, but talk to us a little bit about the process, what your dad told you about the process, and what you remember from those days when the club was formed. Dominic?
I was possibly, well, I was a teenager then, and I remember very clearly so there was a mass. We went to mass, and the priest suggested, you guys should organize and form, not necessarily a club, but you should form an organization, or an association. So we met at the St. Ursula's gym. And in there, there was discussions held, and the first executive was formed, and my father was president. There was a gentleman that has passed away, Firmino Lameiras. He was the secretary, and then Joe Neto, I believe, was the treasurer, and he's still alive at 93 or 94 years old. So that's how it started. So from there, then we would get together and have dances. We'd rent halls, the Polish Hall, the Union Hall, and we would do that. And then from there, it just grew again, organically again. We went and progressed there to what we have today, having the club now today is fully paid for, money in the bank, and we operate on the black. So, but it was started from that small gathering of the community in that gym at St. Ursula's back in the 70s.
Paul, what did the club mean to your dad?
One of the things that, like, kind of Dom, it was someone that he started. I think it's more of the community. He was more of the community, not necessarily just of the club, like the overall community and how we got involved because he got to know people and he started these businesses. It would just, all of a sudden, he started helping others, and it became like something he was super proud of. Like, back in the day, it's kind of funny growing up, nobody knew where Portugal was. Nobody knew, like, we were just like, oh, okay, like something organic, as opposed to now. Like right now, I have people literally on my block, in my own street, 3 families want to move to Portugal. And growing up, your minds would have popped open. You never would have thought of that. And so the idea of how important keeping the culture, because he believed he was super proud to be Canadian in Canada and he loved it, but it was a dual love. Like he never forgot his roots. It was something that was important to him, and the roots and his faith and the community, because that's how growing up in a little village, it was always about community. And so he brought that idea of community from the village into having that group and people helping each other.
In 1979, your dad was again a leader in the sense that he was the one who brought about Festa, the inaugural Festa de Nossa Senhora de Fátima in Chatham. And I'm assuming that that was, again, a product of his leadership abilities and also the trust that the community had in him.
Yeah, it was all about community, and Dad was very, very, very proud of the community here, Chatham, Ontario specifically. I heard him speak several times at conferences about it, and his face would light up. And him being he was fairly religious, of course, of his background and such. And when the Lady of Fatima was started, he was very instrumental in bringing the statue that we currently have, that we use every year. And he was always involved in the Lady of Fatima, whether organizing. I think he organized it at several years, because that we sort of cycle through the community for different families to organize the Lady of Fatima every year. And then again, too, when he got involved with the Knights of Columbus, he always had the Knights of Columbus represented at the Lady of Fatima Festival. So he was very, very involved in that.
I have a great story, and Dom, I don't think I even told you this, but like what there's a couple of reasons that meant a lot to him. One of the interesting ways, like we had really good friends in Kingsville that they were actually from the Fatima area, and the grandma actually was there at when all these apparitions happened. She was literally there. She was the kid at that age. And so he literally heard from her a first witness of Fatima, of what the magic was. So, I think that helped him to be like, oh my God, this is like, it's more than just the faith. It's literally, hey, this is the miracle. He talked to somebody with the miracle. And, you know, that was another like, oh my God, this is so true. But I think another important thing that, my mom went through a lot of, she was
Yeah.
sick. She passed away in 1989, but she battled cancer for 10, 12 years. And this was something she really believed in Fatima and would pray to Fatima. So, you know, that became such an important kind of rallying point in a way, just like it meant more just because of all of those things.
So I assume that it's safe to say that faith also played a big role in the way that your father led.
right from right from the get-go, his brother being a priest, being in the seminary, it was always intrinsic, and I think it grew much more even as he became older, even into his latest days. Like, you know, he passed away this past October, but in the last couple of years, if I would call him, he's either listening to Portuguese church, praying the rosary, or going to church, like every single day. So he was all excited because I found there was a YouTube live version of Church at Fatima that he could watch every day. And he would watch it religiously, literally.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know I am. But I wanted to ask you if you remember of an instance in which your dad showed generosity that exemplified his character.
Oh, well, yeah. And Paul, baby brother Paul, he alluded to that earlier on. We would take in people. Somebody would arrive from Portugal. They would call Dad, and they say, "I'm just getting in from Portugal. Can you sort of l- lead me to where I can get a job and so on and so forth?" Dad would literally bring them home, and they would stay with us sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a few weeks, others for a month. There's one particular person that I remember that stayed with us. He was from Valpassar, so from where we were, and he stayed with us for 6 or 7 months, and he didn't charge him any money. He would just stayed with us. Now those people became super friends with us, and still when I go to Portugal, I still visit him. But he was, to me, he was probably the special one. But there was others. There's many others that he would literally, and like I'm not exaggerating here. They would come, they would call, and he would take him in, and I don't ever remember him charging them any kind of money, and they would stay with us. We would feed them and so forth. So, and he wouldn't think twice about doing that, and it just blew my mind. Like, and think of it, he's got 7 kids, and then Paul came along, 8 kids in the house. So, yeah, I mean,
But
how
see,
many
Paulo,
people?
this is where it organically came along because everybody knew who to call, right? And then it became like, oh, he needs some help, and it he became connected into the community, into other Portuguese communities, and so that's how he became part of the Conselho de Comunidades, and because he's already helping like it wasn't like somebody came down and like who's gonna find somebody in Chatham, right? Like even now, you know, how are you going to find? It's because he was out there organically doing the work, and so like and not just this literally, here's my house, but like, hey, I have to go get my papers. Hey, do you know what you need to do to go to the stores? Like helping, coaching people as
Well,
they transitioned across.
there was something that just popped into my head. For example, when there were deaths in the community, people would come to Dad, and Dad would suggest what funeral home to use, and even he would do prayers. Right. So then, when they would have the visitations, Dad would do prayers in Portuguese. He would lead prayers, and he did that for a while. So it's just one of those things. If they had an issue with immigration, and Dad would help there. When they needed some help with a consulate in Toronto, they would come to Dad. So it was, and that came about because he was going to Toronto every day, so it became organic, and then he would connect with a consulate in Portugal, and because they saw him so often, the relationship was built there. So when we needed here at the club, at the Portuguese club in Chatham, when we needed to invite the consulate to come down, Dad would call him and say, "Listen, we're having a celebration here, and there's one consulate that I can think of, Dr. Martins." He would come down, stay at our house, and he loved hunting. Dad would take him on, bring him down for the weekend. He would do his thing at the club, and then they'd go hunting. So he built those relationships, and then those relationships, connected him to Portugal, and then he started here in Chatham. He started the first riding for the PSD, right? So again, that made the connection to Portugal. So at the time that Dad was active and alive, if I went to Portugal and I spoke about Chatham, they knew where Chatham was. They didn't know where Leamington or Wheatley or Windsor or sometimes Toronto. When they thought of António do Forno, they would connect them to Chatham. So, those things, just like we said, it was just an organic thing that happened, and he just moved into it. He never backed away from a challenge or a request. So,
Off the record, before we began recording, Paul, you and I were talking about your job, and I was saying that you have a big job full of responsibility, and you said it's all because of my dad. And so we've talked so far about how your dad was influential in the community and how people respected him, but he was also a father, he was a husband. And I just want to talk a little bit about how he was at home behind closed doors, how he was as a father, how he was as a husband, as a family man.
Wow, yeah, he was always working. He was always doing something, right? Like, and I think in some ways I am another version of my dad. Like,
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
and he he's they didn't have like I was lucky enough that you know when he was growing up they didn't have the opportunities that we had. Like if he would have been in Canada and started like the opportunities, he would have gone to a university and got a great job and all those things and so the sacrifice like this is why it's so important not to forget, especially as we talk about immigrants now. It's so easy to be like, even I've even seen, being here in the States, I even seen Portuguese here who forget, you know, I cannot forget the sacrifices that my
Yeah.
family. And some people would never say, my brothers and sisters, they worked in the fields. I tell my colleagues, I tell that story because I'm proud of it. Because they sacrificed, I was able to, you know, have a great education. I went to the best university for computer science in the world at University of Waterloo. I was able to have all my dreams. I had it easy. And because they made that sacrifice, but it was the Portuguese communities. The Portuguese like this love for other families and helping them like so that's something that you know I never forget. In fact, I did the most Portuguese thing. So I'm at this conference and we had to do meetups and I met with a founder who's from Portugal and had traveled the world and is in a startup with Farfetch, a big company. And he was telling about his family, and I told my story, and I started crying. And I was like, could I be any more Portuguese? Like the saudades, ideia dos saudades, the ter aquilo, but it was something that we bonded with because I will never forget that and try and pay it forward.
So my father, I probably out of the siblings, I was the one that accompanied him more through his political career and his not a political career, but his political involvement in the Portuguese club, for example, here in Chatham. I back in 2007, of course, I became president of the club here for about 8 years, and I became chair. But all that comes about because of my father's influence, right? It made him very proud. He kept very active in the club, and then even after he retired, of course, he'd come to every function we had. There's even a special table number one, which was the Forno table. He very proud of that, and of course, I carried on. Been involved with the Portuguese club since I was 15, 16. And he was very proud of that. And of course, I'm proud of it myself. But yeah, that was his influence on me. And every one of the siblings will tell you similar stories of things, what dad meant to them and what the influence dad had on them. And all of us eight. No, there's eight siblings, and all of us are very, very successful in our own ways, and that's because of the influence that my father had on all of us.
Your dad became a leader in the community. He founded the club, founded the Festas da Nossa Senhora de Fátima, and then he became a diplomat. He started advocating for the community at a higher level, first by becoming a Conselheiro das Comunidades and also the president of the North American Regional Council. And then, for a short period, he was also an honorary consul of Portugal in Southern Ontario.
Yeah,
Right.
he was, yes, he was nominated and made an honorary consul. Now it stayed for a little bit. That didn't, but that's because of changes in government, and then that one got pulled. But he was honorary consul for I don't know how long, but for a bit. Yeah.
What did it mean to your dad to be a Conselheiro das Comunidades?
I guess one of the things, just thinking about, again, organically, like, that was, again, just amazing. And also, as a kid, I did not appreciate. So he believed so much in the Portuguese. He helped to get funding for a Portuguese school. So I had to go to school growing up after school, 2 hours a day, every day, and then 4 hours on Saturday. And I can tell you, it was like I did not want to go to school for all that extra. But not only did he originally, he helped to start it, like in Chatham, and he helped with some other cities in southwestern Ontario, but he got the government to pay for it. Like the government paid for the teachers. Like who would have thunk that, right? Like, and again, that was because he was volunteering and all this. And I guess the thing that, we and internally afterwards it said is like he did all this. He didn't care about money, right? Like this was all about, he was so proud to be Portuguese. He wanted us to understand. And I mean, I appreciate it now. I can have a conversation and understand Portuguese as I am, though my Dominic might make fun of my Portuguese, but at least I can have a conversation. But that was just some examples of what he did, and he got funding not just for Chatham but for southwestern Ontario. And in fact, even popped up. I was doing searches. It popped up in the Windsor Star, a couples in the early '80s, that him with the consul, they had picked up those stories that again, because he was making that impact. And so a lot of this stuff happened, pre-internet, show, but he got to make lots of friends of part of this. And so like, and a lot of this it was community, and it became organic. And so if you remember, the old, and they still have it, first Portuguese television, like it used to be every Saturday, José Mario was on, right? José Mario was a great friend of my dad. And when he came, he would stay at our house because again, everything was it was all about this community and family, and they were all friends and they helped them. And so it was kind of a cycle where as the Portuguese community was getting bigger and established, he was known as this person who helped to build the community.
You mentioned the Portuguese school, and to me, honestly, I think it's huge the fact that he was crucial in opening the Portuguese school in Chatham. Because if you think about it, I mean, the language is probably the most important part of our heritage, and the Portuguese language to us, obviously, it's very important. And I'm assuming, he spoke Portuguese to you at home as well.
Era sempre português, claro.
That there was no option but Portuguese. Yes, yeah, that's the language that was spoken at home.
Let's talk a little bit about his professional life. And I'm assuming, given his involvement and deep involvement in the community, that through his professional life, even through that, he did a lot of volunteer work, didn't he?
If you think about like how
Everything
the
was
business
volunteer.
worked, right? Like and it organically, because he was already had some of these relationships, like he got to know them and they started selling these trips. Well, what do you need with your trip? You need a passport, right? And then he would then start to help them. And so he got a special, and it doesn't happen very often. He got picked to be a notary so that they, so then that became another service. He charged a little bit of money. He made a couple bucks, but it was more because it benefited the community. So like if you needed to get your procuração to send back to Portugal to get that, he was able to, he got the Ontario government designated him to allow him to be a notary, and that helps so many uh Portuguese be able to like just deal with their normal paperwork. So there was a lot of things that, being able to sell trips back to Portugal and all of these services, they were just an extension of like helping the community.
Like you might not appreciate it like we do because you live very close to the consulate there in Toronto. But here, for example, there's a large community in southwestern Ontario. Leamington has a very large Portuguese community. And every time you needed a passport or a procuração, if you had to go to Toronto and do it, that's a whole day. Whereas you could go to Dad's to the agency, he could do the passport, he could do the pictures, he could do the signing of it. It was a great service to be had there. And like Paul said, he did charge for that, but it was minimal compared to the cost it would take to go to Toronto and back for the whole day. So that's again progression of service to the community. He was always thinking, how can I help?
Father of 8, husband, volunteer, professional, diplomat. How did your father balance all that?
Well,
It's all in one package. It was him. He was, when he was at church, his faith was there. When he was home, his family was there. When he was speaking at the Conselho das Comunidades at the Portuguese Parliament, like it was him. Like he lived a full life. But the essence in him was service. Service was big to him, and he did it. He did it gladly. He did it with no intention of glory or money. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. That's how he was wired, and he carried that. Like his family was very, very important to him. He'd always say to us and to anybody that would listen that his biggest richness was his family. Like he had eight children, and like I said before, all very successful in our own ways, and he was very proud of that. When he spoke
so
about
Paulo,
me,
I think what is also important here is like how did he do all that? And this is something that I think I'm the youngest, I'm more the witness, right? For what my family has done. Like it was team de Forno, right? Because if somebody needed help and my dad wasn't there, Tracy was there, Manuel was there, Dominic was there, right? Everybody helped each other. So it wasn't just how did my dad handle it all? Of course he can't handle it all. And my mom, God bless her soul, like she passed in 89, did so many things too and was able to support him. Like, and so the thing that we were lucky having a big family and we were still close is that everybody helped each other. And so he was able to do that a lot because we did have this extended family and uncles and aunts and this is the thing that I've learned is that, and I go back, and I know I'm saying it again, but it's this idea of the Portuguese community, of the village, the aldeia. Como é que era na aldeia? Como é que vou ajudar os outros? He was born and grew up that way, and it's something that's what he lived his life like.
As he became older and he naturally began detaching himself from some of his responsibilities in the community, What made him happiest in his later years?
I'll jump on that one because I witnessed that. He would come to the Portuguese club every day. It started initially every day. He would go for coffee. It didn't matter who was at home after supper or when the club opened. He would go to the club and have his coffee. He would stay a little bit or not, or he would sit down and play some cards with other people. In later years, like towards his last year, he would come just on weekends. But as soon as the club opened, he would come to the club and he would just sit there and watch. Like people would come and say hi and he'd say hi back, but he would just sit in a chair and he would just absorb it and enjoy that. And of course, me being there, I would, to me, that was enjoyment to myself, but to him, I would say that was his one of his, not but one of his biggest enjoyments was being able to go to the club, have a coffee, listen to some TV, watch a soccer game, and enjoy what he helped build through his entire life, and then seeing his family, his son, carry on and made him very, very happy.
Over the years, I'm sure the family grew. I mean, having 8 children allows for that. So tell me a little bit of how you enjoyed seeing the family grow, how you enjoyed the get-togethers with the family.
We had to rent when we had Christmas, there's 50 or 60, so we had to rent a hall. So like we would rent the Portuguese club for Christmas Eve and our events, because you couldn't have it at a house anymore because there was 17 grandkids and I think 16 great grandkids, and then wives and girlfriends and boyfriends, and so it would be like it was almost like another just party just amongst that.
And it made him very happy. He'd insist, like he'd insist on that, and he was that probably the happiest there at our family's get together, especially at Christmas. For him was a must. We must all get together, and we did, and yeah, that was probably his happiest spot.
Yeah, is there a part of his legacy that means to you the most?
Paul, one of the things that I read in books is that the greatest leaders are the greatest servers, and that's so fitting. That's so fitting for my father. He was the greatest server.
Yeah, and I was like shocked. I'm living now in the States almost 30 years, and I became part of there's a Portuguese associations of the leadership council called Palcus. I was a member and I was a treasurer for a number of years, and I met some of the leaders, and they knew my dad from because they had been in the community. That I couldn't believe it. I'm like in California, and they hear De Forno. Do you know Antonio De Forno? I'm like, what is going on, right? And because he had been in Portugal and he had been at these reunions and helping to raise money and getting funding to keep the Portuguese, schooling, etc. Like he was super well known. Like so, I was always shocked to bump into people for him. And then, of course, it would pivot to all of these they pivoted to like, oh, and I stayed at your house. Like it was not like it, and it's almost hard to think about now, like how that would work. But like back in the day, that's the way it was. Like this closeness, that idea of Portuguese in the comunidade de aldeia is something that's kind of intrinsic to the Portugueseness. And it was something that he really lived it, and you saw it. And so that was something that I always found amazing.
Obviously, your dad was and continues to be respected in the community. But if there's one thing that he would like to be remembered for generations to come, what do you think that would be?
That's an easy answer. Family.
Yeah.
Everything else, he didn't care about money. He didn't care about positions or whatever. It was like his family was everything.
Before I ask you the last question, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to mention anything or touch upon anything that I haven't asked and we haven't spoken about, something that's probably relevant to your father's legacy.
I think a couple of things. So, you talked a little bit about, there's probably two parts. So I think the first thing, how important, his faith was. So he was part of a Corseal group, had, which was a religious group on part of the Catholic Church that did, um, retreats and that was something that helped him build again other communities, and he loved to do that, and he helped others. He helped a lot of other couples. Him, my mom, and then Maria, who he remarried with. He was lucky enough to remarry somebody wonderful that was with him for 30 plus years. um, they were well known in that community, and he gave like that because his faith in the church and that was so big. He spent a lot of time there, and they did a lot of counseling with other couples to help them, and like just again very like organic because he believed in all that, and then he spent 40 years in the Knights of Columbus, and so part of that, if there was a funeral, he would be there to be part of the armored guard. And, if it was somebody from the Catholic Church or the church that was part of, he would be there to represent. So he again gave many different ways. Like the more I say it, I'm like, I feel bad because here I am working all the time. I haven't done any, giving back anywhere close to all that. But that was intrinsic into his head.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, family and server. He certainly was. Family was very important to him, but service was also very important to him, and he did both wonderfully. Yep.
It is evident that your dad had a huge influence on you. And I am honestly honored to have had this opportunity to speak to you and hear from you about his work, about his legacy, about his personality, about all that he meant to you and to the community. And I have been fortunate not to go through the pain of losing a parent yet in my life, but you have. And my last question is a bit emotional, but I wanted to ask you if you could go back in time and you could have one last conversation with your dad. What would you say, or what would you ask?
You go first, Paul.
Yeah. Um, and I actually, because we knew he was passing, I did kind of have a conversation like this, but what I said to him was that he and actually I step back one thing, because when you're going through all this, we're celebrating all the great things about my dad here. Um, my dad wasn't perfect. None of us are, right? He he and I have some of this, like he had a temper and he was excitable and, things could get him going and all this. Like, you know, we're just highlighting kind of the things that are, the best of him. But, he, the thing that I would say to him, and I said to him at the end, is that um, he provided a example not just for his family, but for the community, that he will be remembered. And part of my little things that I can do is be here to remind, like, to tell this story, not because I'm trying to just tell the story of my dad, but that it's an example for us to find what can we do to help. This is part of our Portuguese heritage. It's part of the community. It's part of what we would do in the Aldea. Why can't we do this? And so when I last talked to him, I said I will try to continue to be the witness and do as best as I can to represent him.
I had the pleasure of being with my father at the end, his last days, and for the last year, maybe 2 years, it would be like Dad would call me and say, "I don't know what's the matter with my computer. I didn't do anything, but it's not working. Can you come over and fix it?" And I did that many times.
This is very emotional for you, obviously. The memory of his passing is still fresh in your mind. And I honestly, I'm honored for the opportunity to have heard from you about your dad's legacy and about the tremendous mark that he left in the community and in you both. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, obrigado, Paulo.
Yeah, muito obrigado. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and Paulo, I know, maybe just one afterwards here. I know we talked a little bit on the text around this whole Portuguese Walk of Fame. Like, I've now submitted like 8 or 9 years in a row, and I've had conversations. I've actually sent emails to Anna Balão, like all these people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, of course he should," and super people, but nobody knows how the voting happens. It's like it all goes down to, if you're friends with certain people, like, I submitted it again this year. He responded and said, "Oh, like I'll be in contact again." Like this is the voice. You came from Brantford. You're getting closer to Southwestern Ontario. You understand, like outside of the GTA, like there's Portuguese outside of the GTA, right? So anything that you can help. And again, it's not for us. It's to have that. This is what he helped at the Southwestern community. Like people in Leamington will know, the people in Windsor and Chatham, of course, that's kind of what all we're trying to do.
Well, I do hope he gets accepted this time around, because honestly, I don't see a better candidate than your dad to become eternalized in that way. At lusocanada.com, we're doing that with this conversation, with a page dedicated to your dad. And so we're doing our part, and hopefully that legacy gets expanded to other mediums, to other platforms. So I sincerely hope he gets accepted this time around. E assim termina a nossa conversa com o Paul e o Dominic do Forno, acerca do pai, do voluntário, do líder, do profissional, do homem que marcou a comunidade e continua a marcar. Siga-nos, divulgue e consulte lusocanada.com para conhecer mais sobre a nossa história. Vamos escrever histórias juntos. Obrigado por estar connosco e até o próximo episódio.
Thanks for listening to Luso Canada Podcast. Join us next time as we continue writing history.